default or something. Sorry, set as default device. Let's do that. Maybe I'm disabled. Maybe I didn't want to do that, but I've done it. Can you still hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you pretty well.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
One moment, sorry. I've done something to the sound. Okay.
All right, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Yeah, I think I managed to mute it.
Right.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you great. Better
Okay,
than before. So.
Good. How's the... Does that come through?
Oh, yeah.
Good, okay.
That's
I'm on the right mic.
Yeah.
Okay.
All right,
good.
well, I'm going to get started.
Okay,
so Scott, we're going to start here. Hi, it's Jim Miner. I'm interviewing Dr. Rick Body, from emergency physician from Manchester Royal Infirmary in the UK, who is the author of this month's editor-in-chief pick. Now I'm messing up the name of your article because it's hidden from me all of a sudden. Hold on one sec. Love editing, right? Let's see. I just don't want to get your name wrong. I mean, your article's title. All right, here we go. Sorry.
That's all right.
We'll just start again in a sec here. One more click. All right. And from here. All right, here we go. So, hi, this is Jim Miner, Senior Associate Editor for Electronic Publications at Academic Emergency Medicine, interviewing Dr. Rick Body, emergency physician from Manchester Royal Infirmary in the UK. Dr. Body is the author of this month's AEM Editor-in-Chief's pick, the use of very low concentrations of high-sensitivity troponin T to rule out acute myocardial infarction using a single blood test. Thanks for joining me.
Thanks for having me.
We've got a slow connection today, so I'll keep my my questions short because we want to hear about your awesome article. First of all, can you just give us a little bit of the background behind what led to you doing this great study?
Okay, well, my interest in this started back in 2005. I was always interested in whether we could rule out acute coronary syndromes with one test in the emergency department. Because even if we bring the time period down for serial sampling, it still means that patients undergo 2 blood tests and it prolongs the evaluation period. So I always wanted to know if we could rule out ACS with just 1 blood test. And initially, my interest was in ruling out ACS with other markers of plaque disruption and rupture, destabilization. And as things moved on, high sensitivity troponin assays came about. And I realized that one of the key advantages of a high sensitivity troponin assay is that it can detect low concentrations of troponin. And potentially, I thought we might be able to set the cutoff very low and rule out with a single test with a high sensitivity and negative predictive value. So back in 2011, we published a paper in JACC showing that you could rule out at the limit of blank with 100% sensitivity if you use the Roche high sensitivity troponin T assay. Suggesting that you can rule out several groups of the same then and have a high sensitivity troponin T below this slightly higher cutoff of 5 nanograms per litre. That's something called the limit of detection, assuming there's no ECG ischemia. We prospectively validated that in a single center study recently with just under 500 patients. And now, with the TRAPID AMI study, it gave us an opportunity to validate this strategy in a multi-center international study. It's a secondary analysis from the paper, from the study, which looked at the 1-hour rule in and rule out algorithm. But it comes from 12 sites in 9 countries, so it's good evidence from a big study in early presenters as well, all of whom presented within 6 hours of peak symptoms.
Excellent. So when your study looks really outstanding. When you look at the results, what do you think are the most important findings you came up with?
Sorry, I missed you there. Did you say what the most important findings?
Yes.
Okay. Most importantly, we found that we could rule out an acute myocardial infarction in patients with a high sensitivity troponin T concentration below 5 nanograms per litre. That's the limit of detection of the assay. It's a different cutoff. Remember, the 99th percentile, the conventional cutoff for that assay, is up at 14 nanograms per litre. So we're setting the threshold very low. We could rule out in those patients with a troponin less than 5 and no ECG ischemia on their initial ECG. And to do that, we'd have to accept a sensitivity, a negative predictive value that are pretty good. I think the sensitivity was something like 99.1%, and the negative predictive value was higher than that. So they're pretty good. We can rule out an MI with that. And the incidence of major adverse in those patients are relatively small, excepting in hospital revascular incidence of days is of the order of 1.3%.
What were the challenges that really made this study difficult, or what were things you didn't foresee that made it difficult to do?
Well, it's a multi-center international study. So previously, before I ran this study, I was involved in mainly single-center studies, which have their own challenges. But here we had a really big study with heterogeneous trial centers. This is a secondary analysis, of course. The main paper, published in Annals of Emergency Medicine, looked at the limited detection rule out on arrival. I think the challenges were really in maintaining the recruitment rates across a number of different centres, getting sufficient data in from all of the sites, and we're lucky this is a well-funded study. We were lucky to have funding from the manufacturer of the assay, Roche. Resources were in place to make sure that we could coordinate this effort for such a big study, and I think you need to have robust funding in to do such a big study.
Yeah. Did working with Roche, was that difficult? Did they give you a lot of freedom in your research, or did you ever feel like they were too involved?
Sorry, Jim, I lost you there.
How was it working with an industrial funder on such a large study?
Actually, it was great. So there's a lot of cynicism, I think, probably about industry-sponsored research, but often for very good reasons, because there's potential for an interesting bias to crop up with commercial studies. So I went into the potential for that kind of bias. Actually, I had a really positive experience. Secondary analysis was entirely led by me. I was given a complete data set, complete access to the data. I did the analyses myself, and they were all checked for accuracy by a biostatistician. But actually, it felt as independent as it possibly could do. There was no pressure to give a positive slant to any results or anything like that. It was, I think Roche conducted themselves fantastically. It really felt like an academic-led study with robust funding from industry.
That's great. It seems like a great partnership between your academic work and industry to do work that's so important like this.
Yeah, and I think we needed that. You know, to run a study on this scale involving so many different countries, it's so hard to get funding, and so we need the support of the manufacturer who's got the resources to support it, and we were lucky to have that.
Sure. So, what's your next plan? Where are you taking your research from here?
So I think that this evidence, taken in conjunction with everything else about this same limit of detection rule-out strategy, we can rule out acute MI on arrival in patients who have a high sensitivity troponin of less than 5 and no ECG ischemia. We can rule out a fairly good proportion of patients using that strategy. This has been recommended for use by the European Society of Cardiology and in the UK by the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence more recently. So I think it's ready for prime time use. It's great. It will help us to unburden crowded and earlier rule out, and for patients, earlier reassurance. I don't think we've reached the promised land of the early rule out strategy yet. There's plenty more that we can do in this space. I think there are concerns about the precision of the assay. So that what they even sensitivity on at this about whether we match to patients, the next week it might be a quarter. So we could do better on that. We could also find strategies that make clinicians a little bit less worried about sending patients home instantly. Okay, this strategy lets us rule out an acute adverse cardiac events isn't negligible. And that might concern clinicians, rightly so, I think. Not everybody who meets those two criteria can go home. We've still got to do some thinking and think of the clinical context for the patients before we discharge them. In future, I think rule-out strategies might be a bit more sophisticated and take into account clinical information as well. For now, we've got a rule-out strategy that we can use in practice, but for the future, there's plenty more to work on to keep us active in this space and improving the lot for patients even more.
Well, great. Well, thanks so much for taking the time to talk to me, and congratulations on your outstanding work. It's really exciting research you're doing.
Thanks, Jim. It's a pleasure talking to you.
You too. Well, I think we've got